Welcome to Code Tech Talk. My name is Carlos Cucalon, and today we're going to talk about forms and fields. In this lesson, what we're going to talk about is just mainly theory on how forms get used and some of the different form fields that you're able to use in a form. In the next video, what we're going to do, we're actually going to go through an exercise to create the form that you're seeing on your screen right now, and kind of talking about how I lay out the structure for it, which I actually follow some of the ideas from Bootstrap, and then how we lay out things inside of the page. So just stay tuned for that video and you should be able to see it soon. But in regards to forms and fields, there's three main things that you need to look when anytime that you're looking at a form. So a form is composed, of course, of the form element, but then you also have your labels and your input fields, and when anytime that you type in anything inside of the input field, that becomes your value. That's what actually gets sent to the server. So in these lessons, what we're going to talk about is just the layout of the form, kind of the UI UX, and then after that, I don't have anything planned yet to create something, for example, like a server-side form pull-up so that it can look at the forms and insert them in a database, but maybe that's something that we can do in the future. However, the way that forms work is that you have an interface, just kind of what you see on the screen right here, or what you see on the contact us form that we're going to create later on. And in that form, what we do is that a user comes in, fills out the information, and once they hit submit, then that submit button sends a request to the server-side script, and the server-side script looks at the form, and then depending if maybe there's errors or anything like that, then it either sends a form back and says you're missing this information, or it actually completes it and sends the user to either a success page or somewhere else. So again, mainly for this class, or for what we're going to talk about in this video, is really going to be about the forms themselves. So there's different ways that you can, or different input fields that you can have inside of the form. So I have them set up in this page here. The files for this, you'll be able to find them on GitHub. Place the link for the GitHub files on the description of the video so that you can have access to them. So the input fields, you have different values. So you have, for example, the text field, which the text field is mainly used for single phrase, one line type of operations, maybe including some, like say your name or the name of your city, state, maybe the zip code. You also have input fields for maybe phone numbers, mainly because you have people that style their phone numbers like maybe 1, 2, 3 with parentheses, and then they kind of add dashes or whatnot. So again, that's what we use usually for text fields. In the text fields, anytime that you enter an input field, you have the input type, right, like you see on the screen here, and then you have the type of the field. So in this case, it's going to be text. Usually we use an ID, and the reason why we use an ID is because when you have an ID, you're able to link your label. Like right now, I can click on my label and it takes me directly onto the input field itself, and we use the ID to do that. That's one of the ways that you can set up your label for your field, and that's the way that I would recommend doing it. In this case, we're using a class form control so that we can style it. And then the name itself of the input field for any of the fields that you have on a form is to actually contact them to the server. So the server uses these names in particular to get the value of that input field, whatever that information may be. And then you have also a placeholder. Placeholder is kind of these light gray kind of text that you have behind the text, the input field, so that when you click inside of it and you start typing, it kind of disappears. It just gives the user a hint of what type of information you're looking to have inside of that form. However, it does not replace, and let me emphasize this, it does not replace the label for the input field. The label for the input field is very, very important, especially when you're talking about ADA compliance. If a user who has maybe visual disabilities needs to see what the form is all about, they will need to have a label in order to understand what the input field is. If you have any forms out there that only have maybe a placeholder instead of the label for that input field, unfortunately your form is not ADA compliant. And if, depending on the company you're working for, you might be liable to get sued because of discrimination against disabilities. So I would definitely suggest input forms are very, very, very important, and is one of the easiest ways to actually get penalized if you're not providing a ADA compliant type of form. So the next thing that it also has, you can actually set up something for example like required, which forces the form to, before it gets submitted. So if you click submit, like for example on this other form, if we were to click submit form, it takes us here and it says please fill out this field, and this comes directly from Chrome as a browser, and because it is a required field. So, and another thing that you can also do is like max length. Max length allows you to enter, or allow the user to enter just a certain amount of inputs. So for example, in the form that we're going to create, we have in the state of, like in the field for state, you can only enter up to 2 fields. It won't allow you to enter more. As many times as I try to click, it will only allow me to enter up to 2 input fields. And again, this form is going to be used just within the United States, and that's why there's a limitation. If you're making an international form, then you have to be aware of other countries and how they use zip codes, and how maybe they have states, provinces, depending on what it be. So again, that limitation might not necessarily need to be there, but again, it's something that it's available in case you're trying to do something like that. Maybe if you're trying to do a username, the username cannot be longer than 14 characters, then you can set up a max length of 14, and it automatically stops it there. The next input field that we have here is going to be number. Number is really created only to receive numbers. And I've had people question, why don't you use numbers or the number input field for phone numbers? And just like I explained before, people really like to maybe style their phone number like so. Or sometimes they do just the phone number and then separated by dashes, or they do the phone number separated by periods, whatever it may be. Or maybe they want to give an extension number as well. So then there's this input field down here. It only allows you to enter numbers. So as I'm trying to type in letters, it doesn't allow me to type in letters. It only allows me to type in numbers, and then I can also use these arrows right here to either scroll up or scroll down as far as numbers go. So it only allows you to enter numbers in these fields. It also has the same values as, for example, the text field. So again, you have an ID, a class, you have the name, right? So all of these things are things that you're going to see over and over again, especially the ID, the class, the name. Those are things that you're gonna need to use on every input field. The other thing that you will see, not right here, but later on, will be the value attribute as well. So but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now keep in mind the number, because it is an input type, an input field, it also allows you to use max length as well. You also have the type of email for input field. So here it also, for example, if I were to type A and move away, this is not a valid email address. So you can see that a little bit clearer here. So if I were to type A and then try to submit this, okay, let's go ahead and type this in, try to submit it again. Please include an add in the email address. A is missing an @ sign. So again, this is just a simple way or format that comes from Chrome that lets the user know that this is an email address. So it is looking for the @ sign and maybe a period with a value at the end, like .com, .net, or whatever it may be. You are able to also add a placeholder as well. And then again, you can use require, you can use max length as well. So, but again, the input field type email, it's mainly used just for emails. That's the only purpose of it. Is kind of a way to use it to maybe later on, if you want to create some JavaScript validation or download a JavaScript validation plugin or library, then it has a little bit of an easier time to find that field, make sure and make sure that it works as it's intended to. Password, you also have the input type password, which again, in this case, it replaces your whatever you're typing to just the password, like kind of dots that you see, or maybe asterisks that you're used to seeing. Again, you have the ID, class, name, and again, you can use max length, and of course, you can use required as well. You also have input type hidden. Now, this one is not commonly used by front-end developers because we don't really code a lot of things that are hidden. However, there in a lot of forms, if you were to inspect a form, you will see that there's a lot of type hidden files, which maybe has, or hidden inputs, which get pre-filled with maybe the date and the time of the time that the request was made, maybe the IP address of the computer that's making the request. Maybe if you're filling out a form, maybe it's holding some information from a previous submission that you have made, whatever it may be. So type hidden is something that gets used. And even though you don't see it here, if I were to inspect it, you'll see that I have the input field right here, input type hidden, ID hidden, class form, name hidden. So again, I have that, and you can see that right here is just hidden from the form. It's not meant to be viewable. And again, it's supposed to hold information that nobody should know, right? It's only information that maybe the business is collecting or whatever it may be. The other input field that you have here is the type file, which you're used to seeing. When you click on it, you're able to click on it, and then it allows you to upload a specific file. Now, this, again, we're looking at the front end only. This requires backend coding so that it can accept the file, store the file somewhere else, and then be able to call it back using the form or whatever it may be. So just keep in mind, this is available for you, but it's not necessarily something that you'll be able to code just with front end code using just HTML, CSS, okay? The other section of codes, there is a block of input fields that we have are buttons. So you have the input type submit, which will submit the form. The input type reset, which will actually reset the form. And we actually have it here, and I'll show you why we as designers hate them. They were created for a specific purpose, but I think that purpose is overdone and shouldn't be used anymore. So I really don't use it. I have it here just as an example for our code practice. And then you also have a button, maybe in case you need a button to be able to navigate from one page to the next or whatever it may be within your form. Then you can actually use an input type button. And again, you can use that here. If you were going to use a button for other purposes outside of a form, then I would suggest using the button tag rather than the input type button. But again, that's an option that we have here. Then we also have checkboxes. Checkboxes and radio buttons are in their own unique class, as they all use the same name. If you notice here, you have the name here for all three of these input boxes. And then it also uses the same, it uses different IDs, right? But each one of them have a different value. So what this does by using the same name is that you actually, when you click on it, if you were to submit these two values right here, then whatever value from here and here are going to be submitted as an array to the server to be able to be processed there. You have in input type checkbox and radio, you also have other different attributes that you're able to use, which are checked and disabled. If we were to refresh the page, you see that this one has the value of checked, and then it automatically is already checked on the screen. So it's kind of pre-selected, something that sometimes you may see on subscribe to the newsletter or something like that in forms. They might have that pre-checked for you, and you kind of have to uncheck, which you shouldn't do. You should always allow your users to select themselves if they want to be part of your newsletter or not. So checkboxes allow you to submit multiple values into the database using the same name. However, radio buttons allow you to only submit one single value. So for example, here you can set up maybe value 1, value 2. If you were to look at the example, we're going to use a preference of what time of day they would like to be contacted, and they would like to maybe be contacted in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. So they can select which of these options is the one that is more favorable for them. So that's how you use radio buttons. Again, you're using your type, radio, your ID, your class, and then your name, which will be the same for all the radio buttons that need to be connected. And then here's where the values get applied. So for example, if you were to look at this example, if we were to inspect that time of day, you'll see that the value for that day is going to be morning, and that's what's going to get sent to the server. To the server, if it's going to be in the afternoon, you'll say afternoon. So that's what we're talking about in regards of values. The information is going to get sent to the server, and again, you kind of pre-select and set this up for them ahead of time. Now, the next value that we have is text area. So text area is an input field. It's very similar to our input type text. The only difference, or the main difference I would say, is that input type text is set up for a single entry, maybe like a sentence or nothing more than that. If you want to write a paragraph, then that's what the text area is created for. So here you can enter a full paragraph, and then be able to do returns and maybe open up a new line and be able to kind of write what you would write maybe on an email. That's if you're used to writing emails or maybe comments in a form or a forum or whatever it may be. That's what the text area is used for. Again, you use the text area ID for you to be able to link it with your label, and then you have your class, and then you have your name as always. There's a couple fields that you have. So you have rows and columns. So rows here, for example, I have set it up as 5, which tells the text area to create a list of like 5 different lines, so that I can be able to see them ahead of as I'm writing on the code, right? So it gives it kind of the line length, and then columns the same way. But usually I don't use columns because I'm moving the width of the text area using CSS. So I don't really do columns. And then of course, you can enter a placeholder just like what we did here. And then if you wanted to use max length, you can also use max length here. So for example, let me go here to Libsym to be able to create a Libsym here, and let's go ahead and do maybe 230 bytes. So we have this much content, and then if we were to paste it back in the form, then you see that it stops right there. This rest of the content that we copied over doesn't allow for it to be pasted in there, because we have limited the text length, the max length, to only 200 characters. Usually when you have a limitation like that, we usually add it as a counter, maybe using JavaScript, that tells the user how many more characters they have left in order to be able to type in the content area, or text area, I'm sorry, so that they are aware of how much more do they need to actually, fill in, or how much more do they have to be able to finish their thoughts, or whatever it may be. The next option, the last option that I have here for form fields, is going to be the select form field. And the select form field, you're used to seeing this, especially when you're selecting maybe like a country, or maybe the states for the state that you live in the United States. If you're watching this video in the United States, of course. Now you can see these as you have the select tag, you have your ID, class, name. It all is very, very, very similar. The difference is when you actually look at the code itself, each one of these options are actually using the option tag inside of our code. So here you have the option of Volvo, Saab, Fiat, and Audi, and then you have these so that you can select them. If you notice within the code right here that I'm showing you on the screen, is that you have different values for each one of them. So the name is set up on the select tag itself. However, the values come from the option Whereas if, for example, we're looking at the radio buttons right up here, then the value for the radio button comes actually from within the input field. These come from the option itself, okay? So you have these different options, and you're able to select a single option in this case. If you want to maybe open it up so that it's not a drop down but maybe a list, you can actually use this attribute and property called size 2, and here it will actually make it so that you can actually see at least two sizes here, or two options here available for you to see, and that way you can look at them and then you select them as a list rather than a drop down. And the other option that you have is, besides, for example, size 2, here I set it up as a size 4, but I set it up as multiple. This multiple allows for a user using a keyboard and mouse is to click the shift key, and you're able to select more than one single option, or you can actually, use the control to select specific ones, or if you want to select multiple all at once, whatever it may be. So it allows for users to be able to select multiple form options within this select form. However, because of mobile now, navigation and mobile responsive design, we steer away from this. We actually focus more, if we have multiple options, to use maybe checkboxes to be able to select the options that we have available. The third one that I have here, the final one that I have, is using select, but here this one's special because I'm using something called opt group within my select tag or select element. And this, what it does is, if you notice, we have Volvo, Saab, Fiat, Audi right here on the first one. If you look at the last one, I actually can group them, right? That's what option group, opt group is using. So I can group them by, say, Swedish cars, German cars, and at that point I'm able to see them within a group. So maybe it helps the user be able to clarify or classify what they want to pick before they pick it. So, and again, you can combine all of these options into a single one. You can use one or another. But again, I just wanted to show the difference with select, because there's so many options with select that you can use. So again, the default is just using this drop down. If you want to go a little bit different, where you, instead of the drop down, you have the scroll bar, then you use the size, and you can set up size 2, 3, however many option fields you want to show. And then if you want to allow them to select multiple fields, because you know that this form is only going to be created or used within a desktop, then you can do that as well. But I would suggest at that point using something like what I did up here, which is maybe show them helper text, so that they know, hey, if you want to select all of them, control, hit shift, and then you can select from one to the next, or control if you want to select an individual, different, if you want to skip several options within the select field. And the last one, again, if you want to maybe be a little bit more clear as far as what you're doing, maybe group them into specific groups, then you can use that opt group. So right now, this was just a little overview of what the forms and fields are in HTML. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on using HTML and CSS to be able to create this form that you see on your screen. And then maybe we'll have some exercises. I think I have a PowerPoint that I'll be able to place on that document as well, so you guys can review that. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.